Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Luis Davila. Luis writes documentation for a living. These days, he works with a marketing team at TransUnion. Before that, he worked at Amazon. And before that, he helped the company roll out Workday in a way that made the change easier for employees to actually accept the whole thing. What makes Luis especially interesting for this conversation is that he looks at technology through the lens of clarity. He is trilingual, based in Costa Rica, and spends a lot of time thinking about content design, UX writing, documentation, and how people understand complex systems. Luis, welcome to Trust to Traction. Happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Stefan.
This will be an interesting conversation because Web3 often talks about infrastructure, wallets, protocols, and a lot of technical innovation. But before adoption happens, people need to understand what they are using and why they should trust it. Your background in documentation, content design, UX writing, and large-scale employee communication gives us a practical way to look at the problem. What made documentation and UX writing interesting enough for you to build a career around it?
I would say it's mostly because I've noticed over the years that clear writing is what ultimately decides whether people, your users, stick with the product or whether they walk away. And it all started with a pattern I kept seeing over the years. When people struggle with a product, be it Workday, be it whatever you've created, crypto, you name it, they usually don't blame the products, they blame themselves. They think it's their fault, and they usually give up. Um, and it's not a technology problem. Usually, it's mostly a documentation problem. It's the way you're writing for the product. It's your UI. It's the way you've created your help documentation, the instructions around how you're supposed to interact with the product. That's where the problem lies. Um, I would say that what's really interesting about this field is realizing that words aren't just mere decoration around your product and your UI, is what really drives the interaction between your users and your products. It's the button labels, it's the error messages, it's the warnings before you sign up for something. So the small bits of language, that's what helps users decide whether they want to move forward or whether they want to give up. And once you see that as a writer, as somebody who creates systems and who writes for the systems you're having your users interact with, that's when you realize words are important. They're not just decoration, but they're actually there for a reason, and they're what ultimately decides what your users end up doing.
So if I understand well from what you're saying, it's not simply just writing for one part of the project, because from your saying you're writing in systems, so this covers pretty much every aspect of a project, not just one certain part of it. That's something very interesting. A key point to take right away from this conversation. I find it we're starting this very well. When did you realize clear writing can change how people use technology?
That's when I started writing support documentation back when I was helping implement Workday at a company I worked at. I realized that rewriting the help articles really helped with reducing tickets and recurring questions and user confusion overall. That's when I realized the words were more important than anything else, because those are, you can think of them as guides through your products. They guide you through what you need to do to get something done. And it really isn't, when I said it wasn't just decoration, I mean it. It's not just, to make it all look and sound nice, but you
Yeah.
actually use words to help your user get from point A to B. So that's why words are important, but people often neglect them because the copywriting and the micro copy end up becoming afterthoughts. And so everyone, and this is a generalized issue, by the way. Like in
Oh
every at
yes, very
every
common.
organization, right? You forget about documentation and writing and anything that has to do with writing copy and just documenting processes. That's usually the least of everyone's priorities, and it should be a top priority because that ultimately helps your users decide whether they want to keep interacting with the product and whether they want to continue revisiting your site or whatever you've created for them. Um,
Absolutely, it's very much a communication problem that this touches. In fact, especially for particularly for Web3, in my experience, there is a communication problem towards the user. It's not only in the white paper, but overall in anything technical. Sometimes you see projects trying to talk to everybody at the same time, but in the end, it's pretty much a technical. And I think that is one of the most important ideas in this episode. And well, I think we might emphasize on it several times along the way. What is the clearest communication problem you see in Web3 today? Which one would you define? I mean, we know there are many of them. They're quite obvious, some of them, but which one stands out the most to you?
So, as an outsider, I can tell you, like right off the bat, is the fact that a lot of the community members and the people who are writing for Web3 are trying to sound smart and they're prioritizing that over being understood. And I get that. It's kind of a
Absolutely,
tribal
absolutely.
issue, but it
That's still there. Yeah,
to only think about the outsiders and the users who may not be as well versed in the space as you are. And this is not a you issue, by the way. Like I've seen the way you write,
absolutely.
and
I understand.
right,
Yeah.
and you're
Thank
very
you.
empathetic towards your users, by the way. Not to praise you,
Thank you.
give you
Much appreciated.
unsolicited praise, but most writers kind of forget about the audiences that are not as familiar with Web3. And so what they do is they start using really insider language, jargon, as it were, and they really forget about the people who may not be as familiar with Web3 at all. And so what ends up happening is people either give up or they feel stupid. And the minute you
Yeah,
make a user feel stupid, that's when they give up. And that's when
exactly. Yeah.
they
Like it.
can do
Yeah, yeah.
like
Even before onboarding, there will be basically no onboarding at. I've experienced that in the past also, right? Because we've all been there. We all started from a beginning point. So yeah, unfortunately, we had to go through that. And but yeah, it's around the white papers before. Maybe white papers were more important than nowadays in Web3, since some project have scaled a little more mature, I would say. But a lot of Web3 projects still treat the white paper as the main proof of seriousness. When does a white paper help trust, and when does it start hurting trust, in your opinion?
so that kind of ties back to what we were just discussing a second ago. Um, a white paper can help you when it builds trust. But when it's performative writing, trying to sound grandiose and being loud about your narrative, that's when it hurts because what ends up happening is you confuse your users. So instead of telling them how your products can help them get something done, what you're doing is you're overpromising or you're just focusing on how awesome something is versus telling them what that can do for them. Right. So it's not a matter of like tooting your own horn and going, "Oh, this is amazing," but
Mhm.
rather, this is what our products can do for you. That's what the focus should be.
But in your opinion, what should most white papers say in half the length? And some white papers are pretty long, right? Like I've seen 120 pages, 300. What do you think is being overstated, and why some technical papers they're more to the point and more successful in communicating over something that's really lengthy?
So I was poking around the internet the other day, and I realized Bitcoin's original white paper is 9 pages. That is very succinct, considering how most white papers are really long and difficult to read.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I would say the readability benchmark is 1 to 10 pages. And in fact, if you can't take uh, like the gist of your product and just express it in a single page, you probably haven't really thought it through. You're supposed to be able
Mhm.
to explain this as though you were explaining it to uh, a coworker, a family member, somebody who may not be aware of the space at all. If you can simplify it enough so that almost any lay person could understand it, that's when you know you've got a solid product. But if you're, writing and writing pages upon pages and not really going anywhere, if you're meandering, um, that's really not going to help your user, and it's definitely not going to help you. And I think this does harken back to what Nelson said. I just remember the quote. It was something along the lines of louder narratives don't build ecosystems, meaning, the more you talk
Yeah.
about it, the deeper the hole you're digging, because you're really not explaining yourself. You're just overcomplicating it. So
It's exactly, yeah. The message would get confusing at a certain point. So I guess just to emphasize on the technical writing part of this, adding more information, adding more mathematical structure when it's not required, it will eventually make the message fade away and not get across from.
complexity if you need it. But then if you are going to include any complexity, make sure you explain it. And if you don't think that's going to get somebody to onboard your product or sign up, then don't include it, because you're in a way you're selling past the close if you can explain it in a few words, and then people kind of get the gist of what you're trying to say, and they see the value in it. Then there's no need for you to get into the complexity of it all unless you're ready to onboard them. And by that time, you'll probably find a way to make things easier to understand and to parse through, versus if you're trying to include it all and kind
Yeah.
of trying to be all encompassing from the start, that can hurt more than that can cause a
Exactly.
lot.
In mhm.
Mm,
Yeah, I
mm,
know exactly. In Web3, users often have to trust the product before they fully understand it. So
mm,
getting message across first and having people perceive the product as it is, it's maybe the very first step before anything else. So another question for you. W- how can documentation become part of the trust layer instead of just a support resource?
well, that's a good question. I would say your documentation should be part of your trust architecture. And this goes back to something Nelson said, where he said that, compliance, capital, infrastructure, trust is all built around how you're framing a product. Can't remember if that's exactly what he said, but part of the
It's around
framing
those
is your,
terms, yeah.
yeah, part of your framing is your documentation. If you have proper documentation, um, that is going to essentially prove 3 things to a user who's maybe hesitant to kind of onboard your product. What it'll show is that you and your team have thought about the user and not just uh, your product and what it can do for them, but you've thought about how things can go wrong and what you've done to mitigate the worst case scenarios. But it'll also show them you've already thought about the difficult questions, and you've come up with answers. You've thought about the edge cases, the use cases that aren't as common. You've thought about the risks, the errors, how things can go wrong, and you've built a plan around how to mitigate all of that. And the fact that good documentation always carries clear language, That means you're being transparent about what your product can and cannot do, so it doesn't feel like you're hiding anything from your user. Um,
Mhm.
so the more
Absolutely. Yeah.
the clearer you can be and the more transparent you can be, that's when you're building trust. And a lot of people hide behind complex language because, as we said at the beginning, it can make them sound smart. But that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is simplify it enough so that almost
Uh,
anybody could
yeah,
understand it.
yeah, absolutely. Especially in a Web3, communicating accountability even before the onboarding is it's
Mm.
something valuable, I think, in most projects, and maybe more projects around should adopt this practice. Yeah, and many users do not abandon a product because they dislike the idea in the end, but it is mostly the trust layer, or they maybe feel like something was unclear and they will not commit to the next step. This just kind of brings me to my next question. Where does UX writing usually affect adoption the most?
Oh, it could be anywhere in the user journey, but I would say it starts with onboarding, with just how you're starting out with your first few transactions. I was thinking about an example the other day. Um, it was something along the lines of sign up to authenticate. It was something along those lines versus writing something simple as confirm you own this wallet to continue. Just giving clear instructions to the user, speaking to them as though you were speaking to a friend using simple language. That is where most people get this wrong. If you try and sound too professional and too technical in your UI, if you make the micro copy too complex for people to make sense of it, that's when things go wrong. Because although you may have the right processes in place and your user interface may be simple to understand, if your language is unnecessarily complex, you may be confusing people whose native language may not be English or who may not have a reading level past that of a 12th grader. So you have to
That's
think
right.
about how broad your audiences are and how complex the writing may become to them. And the more complex you make it, the narrower your audience will become because only some people will be able to make sense of your message. Versus if you're simplifying it enough so that anybody could understand it, that kind of broadens your audience. It's not a guarantee, but chances
Yeah, yeah,
are um,
of course not.
you'll be able to get more people onboarded if you make it easier. Plus, even if you're really smart, and even if you have a really high reading level, and you've got this really complex literary acumen, that doesn't mean you have time to kind of parse through the complexity and to figure out what it is you meant to say with a complex sentence. If you're making it simple for users, you're saving them time and brain power. And that's what you want
Yeah.
because you want them to be able to relax around your product instead of, stressing out about it. If you make it too complex, everyone's going to stress out regardless of how smart they are.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of goes hand in hand with Web3 marketing as well, and marketing in general, I would say, because only if you think about a landing page, for example, you already have your target audience, and you want to optimize as much as possible for that audience. It's just some instances might be different, and for example, the worst choice, and right, because it would be something a bit more on the marketing side of things and less technical, obviously. But I think these two spaces, they complement each other, and in the same time, what compared to, let's say, a landing page, right? It's not really like the best comparison for something technical, but on a landing page you might have something very short text, or as short as possible, as to the point as possible. Would you say this would apply exactly for technical papers as well at times, or do you sometimes do not have a choice? The wording and the length, it has to be longer. Is there any exception to that?
That's a really interesting question, and it's a question I grapple with every day. Um, and it really depends on your audience and the purpose of your writing, what you're trying to accomplish, or rather what you're trying to get the user to do with your instructions and what you're writing. But I would say simplicity trumps complexity every single day. And if you can make it as simple as possible, if you can get your message across in as few words as possible, that's when you know you're winning because you're really saving people time. And this can apply to white papers, landing pages, your UI, even your emails. If you're making it easy for people to interact with your product in any capacity, you're building trust and you're ensuring people come back to your resources, be it white papers, landing pages, emails, help documentation, your UI,
Exactly.
because you're making it easy for people. Um, this kind of goes back to something Steve Krug wrote in a design book he published in the 1980s, I think. It's called "Don't Make Me Think," and what the book essentially said was, if your user has to stop and kind of decode how your systems work, and if they have to stop and think about your copy, what you're writing, you've already lost them. So there's no going back from there. You really have to write what the user is trying to do, not what your system does. So, in other words, don't explain what your system does, tell them what they can do with it, and think about what they're trying to get done. And that is the perspective you should be writing from. Don't explain what the system is doing, just go, here's how to get this done. And start with the
Mhm.
instructions, right? Say, to sign up, click here, right? To sign up, click this button. That's
Yeah,
what you should do. You
exactly.
should start with the end
So
of mind. With the end in mind.
So that's actually you're bringing me to another question I was about to ask, because in crypto and in fintech in general, small moments of confusion, they can feel expensive or risky for the everyday user. So where do you think users usually lose confidence? Is it onboarding, warnings, transaction screens, or support content? Where would they lose confidence first?
I would say it's the wallet step because anything could go wrong if you have no way of telling them what's going to happen, how much it's going to cost them, how it works, and what would happen if they made a mistake. And that terrifies people because that's where you usually begin, right? You don't get to experience the product until you've set up your wallet, and so if you don't know how risky it may be, if you make a mistake, can you go back and undo it? Who do you talk to if it goes wrong? That is what should be available from the start, because if
That's
not, what you're doing is you're setting up people for failure, and you're also making them unnecessarily terrified of something that should
exactly that.
feel.
That's what people get nervous before onboarding. Absolutely, yeah. Well, but it's another some interesting thing that stood out about your profile, and that was your experience with Workday. You helped the company roll out Workday without the employees hating it, which is a really big deal and a real communication challenge, especially with teams that maybe are implementing a big change in their daily routines. What did that experience teach you about getting people to accept a new system?
Oh, that's another really good question. I would say the first thing I realized was that adoption is not a training problem because you can train people really well and show them the ins and outs and make it easy for them to find the answers the, they need and you can make it easy for them to navigate a system and to adopt it, right? You can put out
Right.
videos and documentation and help sites. That's not the problem. You can build those. Sure, they're hard to build, but once you've got them, you're set. The problem is people will still be resistant even if you show them how easy it is to navigate something new. People will still be resistant even if you show them the value behind something. So adoption
Absolutely.
really comes down to resistance. um, the other thing is communication. Communication is a big deal. Communication should be a product in and of itself. You should have, and this goes, but this applies to everyone and everything. You should have somebody in charge of communications. It shouldn't be treated as an afterthought, because how you communicate about a product is what ultimately decides whether users want to adopt it or not. It shouldn't just be a
Yeah.
broadcast going, "Hey, we're rolling this out, and it's the most exciting thing in the world." You can tell them what it'll do for them, but so if you're just framing it in a way that's exciting and and upbeat and cheerful, and people are still resistant, they'll just ignore it. So you really have
Yeah.
to think about how you're communicating. It has to be strategic. You can't just go out and announce every release and every new feature. You have to think about how users are interacting with the product and why they're resisting to adopt it.
How
Um,
would that impact them as well? Yeah, yeah.
the thing is, you have to acknowledge that with resistance, there's a lot of a sense of loss. So you have to
Mm,
acknowledge that people are losing ways of working and also uh, habits and things they're used to. So you have to acknowledge there will be some grief around adopting
yeah.
something new, and that's really uncomfortable, but you have to give them room to express their discontent, and that's where you uncover a lot of the pain points. It's not just uh, getting them to interact with your product and seeing how that works out, and what the use cases may be and what the, I guess, worst case scenarios are. It's
Absolutely.
also
Yeah.
letting them air out their grievances, because if the minute you do that, you uncover issues you hadn't thought of before, and
Yeah,
that and
it's
that's
basically understanding your who you're speaking with as well, not just assuming you're speaking to the right person, actually understanding them before speaking to them, or maybe at the same time. You think it's many papers, technical jargon and everything that it could get adjusted, in my opinion, in real time. Many times that could happen as well, to adapt it to the real audience and to the needs of the user. Yeah.
even if you try and approach it from a rational point of view, most people can see the benefit in doing something. But what you have to understand is this is really emotional. So people are not adopting technology. What they're adopting is a life change. And so that's what most adults will push back, because they feel patronized, even though you're trying to be rational. They'll they'll still react emotionally. So you have to consider that too, and that's where
Well,
you
that's
can.
very interesting. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just want to highlight this one, as it does sound very hands-on industry. So people, they don't adopt a product; they basically adopt a new lifestyle. And
And I do,
yeah,
and it sounds hyperbolic, but it's really not.
it
Uh,
makes
it
sense.
it does,
Make,
yeah, it does represent a huge shift in like paradigms, and it does make people uncomfortable. So you have to consider that first, and so that's how you approach it. That's what I did when we started implementing Workday. We thought about how uncomfortable it would be, and we thought about all the pushback we would face, and pushback that we face like every single day, and it got really
yeah,
complex. But so you just have to talk to people and let them and you have to listen to them, just let them talk at length, and that's where you uncover most
yeah.
issues you haven't thought about, and that is more valuable than any traditionally led UX research, because if you want to do actual UX research, you sit down with the users and you let them complain. And that's where you uncover most issues.
Well, another question for you, Luis. Whether it is employees using Workday or users trying a Web3 product, adoption is partly emotional. That's kind of we emphasized earlier. My question for you is, what do people need to feel before they are willing to use a new system? Is 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 the what kind of emotion is? Do you think they should be excited? And we mentioned this a bit earlier, but what do you think should stand out?
Safety. You should make them feel safe. That's the first thing. If you want them to trust you, make them feel safe. Make them feel like they're competent, like they know how to figure things out without feeling or looking stupid. Make them feel respected, as though the product is working for them and not the other way around. They're not working to make the product work. You're making the product work for them, and that's how you show them respect. All of that is emotional. You want to make them feel safety, competency, and respect. If you're able to do that with your documentation and the way you've built your system, um, you're set, right? Because people automatically trust you, and it does tell them you've thought about the difficult questions, as we said before. You're not just thinking about ways to pitch your products and make it look and sound awesome, but you're also thinking about ways to make it work for them, which is what you ultimately want. And only to talk about something I learned by applying some of the principles behind content design, which is a discipline created by Sarah Winters, who used to work for the NHS in England. And she basically redesigned the entire national health systems information websites, where she was thinking about the users and how to make the information on the NHS work for users. And what she says in her book and most of her writing on the internet is content, what you write, is not what you say, but what the user needs. So the shift should come from, let me tell you why my product is awesome, to let me help you feel capable and safe. Like you can do the things you need to do.
And where I'm getting with this is that I've seen you also work in documentation on Amazon. And I'm wondering, doing things at scale, that kind of could blur clarity a bit. What does writing at scale teach you about clarity and staying consistent without blurring the lines?
I think it's not the scale that affects your writing. So it's not how much or how little you're writing and how much content you're putting out there. It's how inconsistent you're being. So if one piece of content is really clear and easy to follow through, and it's steps you can replicate easily, you're good. But then a few steps down the line, you start overcomplicating things and being all encompassing, trying to cover any and all use cases. That's where you go wrong, and that's where scale can become a hindrance. It's inconsistency, so you have to stay consistent. If you're being helpful and upbeat and clear and simple in your writing, that's what you should adopt throughout in terms of tone and voice. You should, and this goes out to everyone, by the way, whether you're writing white papers, landing pages, micro copy for your UI, whatever the case may be in crypto, Web3. If you're writing for users, make sure you adopt tone and voice that are yours, right? Create a style guide. That's what you need. You need to think about what your style is going to be, whether you're being upbeat, whether you're being formal, whether you're being helpful. You need to think about how you're going to write for your audience, consider who your audience is, and make the writing work for them. But come up with a style guide, come up with rules to know what you're going to write like. So you're not using complex words in one step, but then you're using simple words in another. If you do that, you'll confuse users because they'll feel as though it's different people talking to them. if you hire a team of writers, make sure they're all writing in the same style. Don't let them adopt their own style, because even though it may work for certain things, it'll make your copy and everything you're writing inconsistent. So you need consistency throughout, if that makes sense.
So that does make sense. I was just thinking that as we were speaking, that you're asking technical writers to find their own voice first of all, and uh, when writing at scale, at one point or another, they will be other writers adding to the work. So having many voices eventually many styles could make things confusing. And that there you have it. You just kind of answered this question. So it's good to have a certain guideline when doing things at scale with several writers. You cannot just have different voices, if I understand well, right? Different
Mm.
voices, different tones on the same paper. Um, I mean, it's all communication at the core, but what breaks first?
Trust. That's what breaks first. If your communication fails, if your content management fails, if your writing fails, that's what breaks first. Trust. Because that's why writing is important. You may not think it is, and that's okay, because you're not supposed to know this, especially if you're working on Web3 or crypto or you're building a product. However, you do need people who know what they're doing when it comes to writing. Ideally, in an ideal world, you'll get somebody who can think strategically about how you're communicating your product and what it does and how it can help users. So you need a content strategist to decide when and how to communicate and what types of communication you're going to put out there. You also need a content management system, because you need to know what to do with your content, whether it's old, outdated, and new, or potential content. You need to build a system that tells you when and why and what to publish. What usually breaks trust in your writing is the terminology you're using. Um, if you describe the same feature with three different names across platforms and surfaces, users will start doubting whether they're in the right place. So you can't let your terminology drift. That's why you need to keep consistent, and that's why you need glossaries. Glossaries may seem unnecessary, but they're
Glossary, yeah.
really builds your structure. So if you have a proper glossary and you're introducing terminology as you write, you want to make sure that's consistent, because that's what'll help the people doing the writing for you. Whether you're doing the writing yourself or somebody else is taking care of it, the terminology, as long as it's defined and you have clarity on what the terms mean to you and your user, that's where you're building trust. If you're using different terminology throughout, even if you're talking about the same thing, not all users will pick up on it. And so that'll confuse them, and confusion always breaks trust. So terminology,
Yeah,
that's key.
absolutely. That a solid glossary, in my opinion, you would is build a good pillar. Also, if you're building, or if your team is building with AI, I think that would be very good research for certain projects. Yeah, especially that building at scale. Um, so another question for you, it's more Web3 focused. Web3 often uses language that makes insiders feel smart and outsiders feels excluded. It's kind of you mentioned that yourself at the very beginning that it is something stands out, so that's no secret. This um, industry is still struggling with this aspect. My question for you is, what Web3 language should founders stop using with normal users, with everyday adopters that are not as technical? And what should they say instead?
So I would say, and this goes out to everyone, not just people working in Web3. This goes out to everyone who builds and develops products. Stop using the jargon that is characteristic to your tribe and your space. If you're overusing the jargon, you'll confuse the outsiders whom you're trying to onboard and get interested in your product. So use simple language. Start with thinking about what the user is doing and describe it that way. Um, if you need to name a technical concept, explain it so that you're not confusing any outsiders, but don't lead with the jargon because the minute you do, you're pushing people away. Um, I would say I've seen some examples. I was doing a bit of research and I saw something along the lines of connect your wallet, sign this message, approve this contract, gas fee, seed phrase, stuff like that. Maybe use simple language instead of saying connect your wallet. Say something like sign in with your crypto account, things people can understand, even if they're outsiders, because that's where you lose people with the complex language. So even though the jargon may make you feel as though you belong, you have to know when to use it. The jargon is appropriate when you're discussing, you know, when you're talking shop amongst peers, that's when the jargon is appropriate and useful. But when you're explaining stuff to users and potential clients and investors, keep it simple because chances are your jargon is what's driving people away.
Absolutely. One hard part in Web3 is simplifying the message without making it inaccurate. So that's why I find some founders or people in the industry, they tend to avoid not using jargon because they would find that maybe the message won't get across. Um, this is an obstacle many people in the industry still facing. From what you said, one of the solution would be explaining everything. So using the jargon, explaining the jargon, and that would build more context. But in the bigger spectrum, how do you make technical content easier to understand without feeling as if you're dumbing it down and maybe risk to making inaccurate? Yeah.
No, that is a really interesting way of framing it, and I wanted to kind of paraphrase something Sarah Winters said in her book, Content Design. Um, and this is a maxim of mine, by the way. It's not dumbing it down. If you're simplifying it, it's because you want broader audiences to understand what's going on. If you must include jargon or technical terms, make sure you explain them so that everyone can understand them. Even if you're writing for a very specific audience and you're creating products for knowledgeable, more well versed audiences, chances are some terminology may mean a completely different thing to them. Not everyone's going to use jargon the same way. So if you must include technical terminology, actually take the time to explain it. Maybe not everywhere, but make sure you do include it when people start taking steps towards being able to do
Yeah.
something with your product.
Yeah.
Um, Using plain language doesn't have to mean you're dumbing anything down for anyone. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't make
Yeah.
you sound less serious. What it does is it shows the user that you've actually thought of them because you're saving them time and trouble by they're not having to think about what you wrote and having to analyze it and really break it down in their heads. If they're not making an effort to understand what you wrote, that's where you know you're on the right track because you're making it easy for them to interact with your product, and
But
that's what it's
that,
all about.
yeah. But yeah, then again, there's this risk of am I am I making it too simple that it is becoming inaccurate? So just circling back to that, when to lower this risk, what, in your opinion, what should writers never remove when simplifying technical content?
Nothing that would make it unclear what you're doing. So if you're describing what you're doing, and it still makes sense and you can still understand it, that's where you know you're right. But if you're removing everything for the sake of simplicity, that's also being hyper corrective. You don't want to remove anything that would make it clear what you're doing. So that's where you strike the balance between clarity
Yeah.
and simplicity. Like,
So hypercorrective, it could even, especially in Web3, it could even
mm,
fall into the self-censoring kind of spectrum because you're overdoing it, there will be many things probably that will be left out in the
Right.
bit.
No,
So
you
it's
don't want to.
finding a balance is actually very important from what I understand. Yeah, that's it's a very interesting way. Do you have any techniques, or how do you find the balance? How do you notice that, oh, I'm overdoing it now, or I'm not doing it enough?
So you could try doing some A/B testing, testing your writing and your messaging with users. But if you don't have the opportunity to do that, you could also use people around you who may not know what you're doing and may not
Yeah.
understand your space. And then you'll ask them if that makes sense to them. If you can, if it makes sense to someone who doesn't have a clue about what you're doing, then you know you're probably on the right track. You can test out your language. You can ask people. That's the easiest thing. If you've got access to users, you can actually test the copy and the UI with, then by all
Mhm.
means go ahead and do that. But if not, then ask
Yeah.
the people around you, whether at your own company or in your inner circles. There may be somebody who may be able to give you a valuable outsider opinion on how clear your messaging is. But chances are, if they get the gist of what you're trying to communicate and they know how to get something done because they're able to go from point A to B with your instructions, then you know it's right. And like you said, it's not easy to know when you're leaving something out that's really important, and
Mhm.
so that's why you have to think about whether you're still being clear while simplifying. You don't want to oversimplify, but you don't want to overcomplicate. Like you said, you want to strike
Absolutely.
that balance.
Yeah. Absolutely. In marketing, we also use this technique very much. We A/B testing. You can even see now it's a feature that YouTube is offering as well, right? So you can A/B test your thumbnails, and the reason why I'm mentioning this, I find that technical writing and marketing, there's a lot in common. There's a lot of common ground, but in many companies, documentation and marketing, they're treated separate worlds. Where should documentation and marketing work more closely together, in your opinion?
Feel that most of the companies I've worked for, documentation, the technical writing and
Yeah.
translating the tech specs into simple language, and then people write for more of a marketing field, so to speak. They operate in very different worlds. They use different tools. They measure success differently. They write for
Mhm.
different audiences. But I feel as though we should be collaborating a lot more because marketing is what's selling the promise, and documentation is what makes the promise true. So you've got marketers, writing white papers and one pagers going, these are awesome features, and this is what these features are going to do for you. But then the documentation is going, this is like how we're going to make this happen. This is how you can get this done. And so there should be there should be more overlap, honestly, because
Yeah,
I
but
see a huge disconnect between the two disciplines, and they should be interrelated, not treated as
what is
separate.
that's very interesting. So what is the biggest disconnect in your opinion? What does marketing usually misunderstand about documentation?
I would say the way features are described. Um, the way marketing sort of offers something that may or may not be available, but for the sake of selling, but also for the sake of compliance and
Oh,
risk.
that's
Right.
sounds very common. Yeah, you're like spot on with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to talk to your PR people if you've got PR where you work. You also have to talk to legal to make sure you're not over promising. Because if the technical writers talk to legal and compliance and PR, marketers should definitely consider talking to them as well. And they should compromise on what makes exciting copy true. So if I'm, hyping up a product and I'm overselling, that's wonderful. That's great because that's what you want to do. You want to be able to make money
Yeah.
by selling more. We also have to consider whether you're going to delivering your promises and whether you're over promising. Because if you're over promising, then that's when you get other people into trouble. And it's not just that you get them into trouble, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Because no matter how exciting you make it, that's not going to make it true. So that's where I think there should be more overlap. We should be talking
Yeah,
about the
yeah,
things we
that
can.
would that would definitely cost some trust in the long term. What information does a serious user need before they take action?
They need to know what they're risking. They need to know what the worst case scenario is. Um, I would say there should be four things. So what the action does, so what the outcome is after you take action, what it'll cost them. That's important. You should never hide it. You should never be, you should never keep that under wraps because that's what ultimately uh, makes people want to be able to make a decision. And you should also tell them what they should do if something fails and where to get help. You should make it easy for people to be able to access the help they need. And you should also include some proof, or at least an inkling of what they're getting out of taking a particular action. I would say Web3 is really good at doing the first two, telling you what the action does and what it costs. But then when it comes to the third and fourth, what happens if this fails and what proof exists that this product has already done this, that is where there may be less transparency. So I would say um, you really want to clear you really want to be clear about that and not like say leave
Exactly.
room for confusion because that's where you lose trust.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, it's something we do see often. And the user cannot convert, like from a marketing perspective, you cannot convert a user if they still feel confused or exposed to risk. So obviously they will turn around and look for a competitor or look for another product. And talking about risk and conversion in a way, what I was trying to get here, because you are trilingual and based in Costa Rica. So you are not only thinking about English first technology information, so communicating less risk, communicating, eliminating confusion per se. What changes from English? Like, let's say, what changes when a product has to explain trust across languages and different cultures as well? What gets lost or what is gained in translating?
So that is also a really good question. And you only really learn this once you've worked in translation and localization. So there's a difference in terminology, and I feel like
Yeah.
most people kind of use these interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. So translating means taking words from one language and interpreting them in another, whereas localization means making your translation work for your specific audience. It's not the same if I were to say write
Mhm.
a piece or a support document for someone in France as if I were to write it for someone in Quebec. There's a difference in how language is used. And even though it's the same language, and even though people may still be able to make sense of it, if I want to speak to the user and if I want to resonate with them and just make it feel like it was written by a human they can actually relate to, uh, your translation has to be localized. You can't just translate it because it's not going to work for every locale. So whatever you write for Mexico is not going to land in Colombia. Whatever you write for Colombia is not going to land in Argentina. It's not even the verbs and the
Absolutely.
specific local words you're using. It's the way you're expressing things because cultures change from one place to another. You may speak the same language, but that doesn't mean you share the same culture, and culture
Exactly. I
really
don't
affects. So
understand.
yeah,
Yeah,
and,
the cultural aspect. That's very interesting. So there is a major difference that we should emphasize on more between translating and localizing a product. And especially in Web3, where you have projects that are being built for a global audience, which are more general, but I would sure love to see more localized products as well. I think that's what builds even more trust in the long run. Global products are fine as well, but seeing localized products is also feels closer to trust uh, in that aspect. Well, thank you for clarifying this. It's a very interesting take. Well, a lot of technical founders believe the product should explain itself. Um, on this topic, what should crypto founders understand about content design before they launch?
So
What should
content
be
design.
clear before the first user even connects a wallet, in your opinion?
So that's also another really interesting question. I would say it goes back to what we said a few minutes ago. You should always make it clear what users are about to do, what it'll cost them, what could go wrong, and how to back out if they've made a mistake or if something goes wrong. What people forget about content design is that we're not just talking about words and how you're laying out information on a page or on a document. Content design is a discipline that teaches you how to decide what information should exist every time a user makes a decision. So you're thinking about what steps they're taking and why, and where those steps are going to take them. And so you're thinking about the information that should exist.
What are the warning signs of a badly written white paper over or something, the signs of badly written technical paper?
I would say it's the length, and the fact that in most of them, because this is a, I think it's an industry problem, problem you can find in almost every industry. Uh, if you can't find a definition for what you're doing, a mechanism in the first two pages, ideally it should be on the first page, but if you can't make sense of what you're on about on the first page, you've got a problem. If you don't have it in the first two pages, it's not there. White papers shouldn't open with a vision. They should open with a problem statement. They should tell you what your product can do for the user versus what you want to be able to do with the product. I understand that you may want to hype it up so you can get investors. I understand that you may want to get
Mm,
people excited about what
yes.
you're doing, but I think it's more helpful if you're framing it in a way that says, this is what we're going to be able to do for you, and this is why you need it. This is the problem you're going to be able to solve with it. You're not writing a novel, so I don't need the history behind how you came up with your awesome idea. If you want to express it briefly, that's okay. But
Yeah.
we don't need a whole chapter on why you have this vision and this epiphany about how your product is great. I mean,
Yeah.
that works great if you're giving a talk, if you're trying to get your investors all hyped up in a meeting, that's awesome. But I think it goes back to something Nelson said. Don't overpromise, don't hype me up, like actually tell me what this is going to do for me. Because if you just talk to me about how great this is, but you're not showing me, you're just telling me, then this is not going to go anywhere. And I feel that's the problem with most white papers. They should be brief, like as brief as possible, and they should just tell you what your product can do. You don't have to tell me what it
Absolutely.
cannot do. You should just focus on what it can do. And I think most people would find that more valuable than reading 30
Yeah.
pages on why you have this vision and why you think this is like the ultimate solution to all of your problems. Like, don't tell me, show me. Right.
Exactly. In the end, it's relevance before you have to have relevance first before building trust. So yeah, in software, usually in software field, people talk about technical debt. I think in Web3 also has a communication depth. Uh, how would you frame that? What does communication depth look like inside a product or a company, in your opinion?
I like that.
And
I
when
like how
does
it's, yeah.
yeah, is it when does bad communication become expensive? Basically, that's yeah,
Yeah, that's a really good way of framing it. I like that. Communication debt. I would say communication debt, or rather, bad communication would become expensive the minute your users give up on a task because it seems too complex to um, for them to be able to do anything about it. If you're essentially making it too hard for users to get something done and they give up on it and they're not using a certain feature because they simply can't make sense of it,
yeah,
that's when your bad communication becomes expensive. You should really take time to think about how
yeah,
you're communicating everything every step of the way, not just your white paper, not just your pitch, but like the
exactly.
steps as you're giving them and how to get
Yeah,
something done. If you haven't thought about that, then you don't have a product, even though you may have built it. If you haven't thought about the writing, if you haven't taken the time to work on the writing, you still don't have a product. And I know that that doesn't,
absolutely.
but because
Yes,
people treat it as an afterthought, um, that doesn't sound like it can be a problem, but if you don't know how to communicate what the value of your product is and what it can do, and you don't know how to communicate how to get something done, you're in trouble. And I think that that should be a priority, not the
that
foremost priority,
doesn't
but it should
doesn't build
definitely.
trust at all. That's that
Mhm.
can flag major trust issues as well. On a we mentioned AI a bit earlier, but I'm thinking about that AI can produce more content than ever before. But more content doesn't always mean more clarity, especially when it comes to
Mhm.
technical writing and even marketing in general. So how should teams use AI without making their documentation worse, in your opinion? What still requires a human judgment? Would you?
I would say, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking, where would
Yeah.
you start with this? Is more from the core of the team, or where does the human still is still needed in the loop?
I would say AI can be really useful to help you draft, maybe restructure and make sense of certain things that you may not be able to rephrase on
Yeah,
a whim. That would take you a really long time to sort of figure out and wordsmith. You could definitely use it to make your life a little easier as a writer or somebody building a content system. But what AI will not be able to do for you, and this is where you come in as a human being, as a writer, as a creator, a developer. You should be able to decide what content should exist, what to leave out. So, in other words, what you're not including because it's either too all-encompassing or too complex, and what the user is being asked to do, whether they're being asked to do a lot or little. And so the strategy portion of it, deciding what to publish, how, when, and why, that should
yeah,
that should be left
mm,
to humans. That should be for humans to decide, because AI can help you rewrite stuff, right? You should never rely on it too
exactly.
much, but if you train your agent enough so that it knows what style you're going for and what sort of sentence structure you want to go for, and you can't think of it, as I said, on a whim, or just fast
Yeah.
enough, AI can definitely help you make
So
that easier.
it's basically building strong pillars for the AI agents and using them in a constructive way that is actually applicable. So that, I guess, from my understanding, that's where the human comes in the loop,
Right.
is building the strong pillars, but also using the judgment to apply it correctly. Yeah,
Exactly.
and
Like the actual empathy. So knowing what your user needs and what they may need, that side of the, I guess that side of the equation, that you cannot leave to AI. because it won't get it right. You know your users better than I would.
Yeah,
Um, I feel like you can figure out what most people need without relying on AI. And you shouldn't rely on AI for the strategizing and for the empathy portion of it. You should really have a human think
absolutely.
about what you're gonna need.
My doing empathy rate. Yes, absolutely. So I guess this is something that maybe founders and marketers in Web3 right now they should be taking notes. There's one that will be one useful thing in this industry. So just to add on top of this, another useful thing for founders and marketers listening to this podcast right now. My question for you is: if a Web3 company wanted to improve communication this month, where should it start?
I would say so. Do an audit as though you were a first time user. And whatever pain points you uncover, whatever inconsistencies you discover while going through your product, your writing as a first time user, that's where the issues lie. And if you have access to somebody who is not at all aware of what you're doing and what Web3 is, if you have
Mhm.
access to people, users, family members, friends, people you know, who may not be aware of what you do, may not understand it at all, and they're going through your content as a first time user, their confusion is information. Whatever trips them up, however simple it may be, that's those are the issues you should be taking note of, and those are the issues you should be fixing first. That is what's going to inform your content strategy, meaning what you're going to publish and why, and how you should be approaching it, how you should be writing about it. Because
Yeah.
if you don't go through your content as an outsider, or rather, if you don't have an outsider go through it, how are you going to know what outsiders and actual users will need? If you have your buddies who know exactly what you're talking about and who know how your product works, go through your content, they're not going to be able to uncover what other users and outsiders will be able to pick up on. And if they
Yeah,
point
absolutely.
something else to you that's too complex and too difficult to make sense of, you should be paying attention to that. You should really focus on the negative feedback. As hard as that may sound,
Mhm.
it's where you'll uncover most of the pain points. So you should definitely focus on you should be really critical and focus on the negative. Sure, take
Yeah,
stock of
yeah.
the positive, but like focus on the negative because that's where you're going to sort of
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're strongly in agreement here and resonate on this one. Uh, Finding pain points through a little bit of R&D is it's actually a very important starting point, and it's also a process for optimization in my opinion. um, and Yeah, but it's something, I guess it's a bit universal, not only specific to Web3. Sometimes we might think, oh, Web3 is just Web3 marketing, but it's not just Web3. It's a combination of pretty much everything, and whenever it's the appropriate time to use the information. That's why technical writing it's important. Many people don't think, oh, it's not Web3. Well, it is Web3. It's pretty much everything. It's kind of like math. But well, it's in a Web3. We talk about trust mostly, but to get there, there's so much more happening until the actual layer of trust. So usually we think about code, we think about security or decentralization in Web3. But before users trust the product, they need to understand it, right? So where do you think trust actually begins?
so that's when users first interact with your products. That's when trust begins. So if from the first sentence you feel uneasy or uncomfortable or just confused, then that's when you know you've got a problem. Um, You build trust with the words you're using, with how you're introducing your product. If it's too difficult from the start, that's where you start losing trust. So if you want to build trust from the start, just make your writing simple. Think about your audience, and don't just start with the hype, with the
Yeah, yeah,
performative uh,
exactly.
uh,
Like with the
cheerfulness.
promising, I guess. Don't start with the
Yeah,
over
I mean,
promising.
it's fine if you promise, but like you're not pitching your product anymore. What you're doing is you're showing what it can do, right? You
Yeah,
can leave the hype and the performative cheerfulness for the, for the, I guess, investors meetings, but when it comes to your users, make it simple for them to be able to interact with it. You don't if they're already trying to use your products, you've got one foot in the door. So all you have to do is focus on making it easy for them to interact with it. Um, Words come first. Your documentation should come second, and that's where users confirm whether your product is useful or not, or if they can make sense of it or not. So start with the words. Think about how you're communicating, and don't hype it up. You don't need to do that. You just need to make it simple so they'll want to interact with it. You know.
absolutely. Hyping things up sometimes can play against the project and simply just add more confusion to the whole thing. Especially in crypto, but in fintech in general, confusion is not a small problem. It's something that all the project have to deal with, because a confused user can feel like they are about to make a very expensive mistake, and once that happen, it will just kind of be a chain reaction with other users. So, but in your point of view, what is the real business cost of having confused users?
No, that's a powerful question,
In
uh, and a bit of a curveball too. But I would say, if I have to be completely
um,
honest, based on what I've seen, is people giving up from the start. That's your biggest cost, because not only are you losing someone, but you're also losing the opportunity to get honest feedback. Because if someone
oh, that's so true. Yeah,
stops interacting with your product from the start, they're not likely to complain. They're not likely to tell you why they gave up. They're not even going
yeah,
to take the time to tell you why this doesn't work or why it didn't work for them. And you'll obviously lose trust.
yeah.
So they won't want to give it a second chance because it was too hard the first time around. Um, so I would say that is the real.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah,
not
that's
even
when
losing the
they might close the door, close the window as well.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And you won't hear from them. That's the thing. If they interact with your products and then they complain about it once they've used it, that's where you get opportunities to improve it because you'll get actual feedback. But then when they're not even using it the first time because they're giving up on it from the beginning, how are you expecting to get anything from them? You're not going to hear from them. They're not likely to
absolutely.
complain.
Yeah, yeah. That's confused user usually is it might show as a lower conversion in a marketing point of view as well, but that would also mean more load for other departments, like maybe more support tickets, more lost trust, negative comments online, or like you already mentioned, like obvious user drop off, and maybe even a chain reaction on top of that. So that's very valuable insight. Thank you for sharing that. For technical founders, and this is something more regarding technical founders, that they often understand the product so deeply that they forget what a first time user does not know yet, because they're obviously into everything at a deeper level, including technicalities, and for them it's everyday life. It's understandable. What is the biggest communication blind spot you see in technical founders? Like
Okay,
what should they
that is.
explain? Yeah,
No, I like that question. See, you're asking good questions. I like
just
I
trying
like that.
to
That's really
stay
interesting.
pretty much on point. Thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was gonna
It's
say, and this happens to everyone. It's not just founders. It's whoever designs a product or creates something. They know so much about what they've made. They're so imbued in their own
hmm
field of expertise
yeah.
that they forget other people don't know what they know. Um, and if you're not the user, how are you going to know what you don't know? You can search for information to help you make a decision. But if there are things you completely you're completely unaware of, how are you meant to look for that information? How are you meant to look for the support you need? And so this is what most I would say most people forget is that people don't know what you know, right? You may feel as
Yeah.
though everything is self-explanatory. So what you do is you're building your interfaces and you're writing your documentation and you're writing
hmm
your white papers with your
Exactly.
own perspective as the mental model of how something's supposed to operate. But then you're not being empathetic in the sense that you're not thinking about what people will actually want to know and how they're going to approach things. You're not thinking about what you're asking of them. You're not thinking about what could go wrong and sort of the insecurities and the doubts and the qualms they'll have when they're using your product. And so that's where you should do a bit of user research. If you have access to users and potential, like your potential audience, you should definitely think about how you're framing things. Because if you're approaching it all from your own perspective, you'll ignore what people actually want to know. You're explaining, maybe you're over explaining the mechanics of it and the logic behind it. And what people want to know is how to use it. But you can't really see the forest for the trees because you're so involved in your own thought process, and that's great
Mm.
because that's how you build something, right? But you also need people to help you figure out what users are going to need. If you don't have time to be empathetic, you don't have time to think about your user, get someone who does, and they'll help you figure that
Exactly.
out. Be it a technical writer, content designer, and I'm not, self-promoting or anything like that or promoting
No,
my
that's all
peers.
right. But there's nothing wrong with it, with asking help, because obviously a founder. First episode, he mentioned that a founder is a founder, is a title, is not necessarily a way of living. Is it's a job title in the end, because it's not like we're born a founder. As you mentioned, that a founder cannot basically know everything to begin with. So when it comes to technical, so it's normal to ask for advice and seek for consultants, and have the right team. I find that is actually it's part of building. Like, so if we discuss founder, definitely the team, and finding the right people for the right job is something that highly encourage, in my
Right,
opinion.
definitely. You want to,
Yeah.
so you don't have to hire someone permanently per se, but you definitely want to have someone around who can, like I said, strategize for the content you need, decide what and when and why to communicate, how to manage your content, because guess what? You're going to reuse it at some point, and what you've already built, you can iterate upon, but you need to have a system in place that helps you keep track of what you're writing. That helps you maintain your content efficiently. And so that's where a writer may come in handy.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying hire a writer forever, but you
It
might you might need
depends on
one.
the
Maybe as a
context.
consultant, maybe just to look at your infrastructure and what you've built. And it doesn't have to be a writer. It can be someone who specializes in information architecture, somebody who specializes in content design or UX writing, depending on what you're building. But you definitely want someone who can go back to what you've built and think about what you're doing and why you're doing it and whether that's going to help users or not. And as a founder, you're going to be excited about your product. You're going to want to hype it up and tell everyone it's awesome because you believe in it. It's your vision, it's
Mhm.
your idea, and that's amazing. But so if you're not taking the time to think about your users sympathetically, your excitement is not going to do much for you because you're forgetting about the most important element, which is not just shipping your products, but like thinking about why your users should care. Like like shipping it is just halfway. You're halfway there, right? When you're shipping a product, you need to think about the
Absolutely.
rest of it, which is how your users are gonna interact with it and why it should matter to them. So if you can get someone to help you with that, the
That
you're,
that would be
you're
the right direction to go. We said in fintech in general that you want to build trust before actually putting the product out there. So, well, Web3 will keep getting more technical, in my opinion, and users still need clarity at this very moment. We're still discussing confidence and trust. So, what is one communication habit Web3 teams need to upgrow, in your opinion? What should they replace it with, if there is something?
I would say um, you should make sure your writing makes your user feel capable and smart, but mostly capable. Like you can
Okay.
you can get something
Yeah,
done with
that's
the
true.
with the instructions you're given. Every sentence should make you feel confident in your ability to do something, and not make the writer feel smart. That is one principle of clear writing: is don't use words just to make yourself sound smart. You're not writing for yourself, you're not writing a journal, you're writing for someone else. And so if
Yeah,
a simple word can convey your message successfully, stick to the simple word. Don't use the grandiose words that are not going to
just
do anyone any favors, just so that you come
absolutely.
across as well versed and smart and refined. That's not going to help anyone, because you're not writing a journal. You're writing documentation. You're writing a white paper. You're trying to get users to interact with your product, to be able to get something done, to get from
Exactly.
point A
Yeah,
to
yeah.
B.
Don't just say blockchain because it sounds cool, or Web3 project, or emerging market, or it
And
has
if
to
you
have
must,
substance in it. Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And if you must, say those words and use them. Explain
absolutely.
what they mean, especially if you're writing for outsiders. I think that's the biggest problem. A lot of people write in to sound smart, and I get that because it's tribal and you want to show like you belong, and so you want to make sure others can see you as belonging to the tribe. But so if you're writing for users, that's not what you want to do, because what you'll do is you'll push them away because they're not going to have time to figure out what it is you meant by writing emerging markets, whereas you should have used easier terminology. And like I said, if you must use like jargon and really specific terminology, define it. If you're writing for a broader audience who includes people who are
Mhm.
familiar with what you're writing about and people who may be unfamiliar. And if your audience is mostly people who've never touched a wallet or who've never thought about crypto or Web3 in any capacity,
Yeah,
then go ahead and write for them, and forget about the people you're trying to impress in your industry, because they're not important. It's your users who are important. That's what I would say.
exactly. It's
Um,
exactly who you're building for in the end. It's not for the hype. Yeah.
right.
Luis, thank you for joining Trust to Traction. I really appreciate having you here. I do have more questions for you, but I think it's enough for this episode, and I hope to have you again at a later time. This was a great reminder that in Web3, clear communication is not just good writing. It is part of how trust and adoption are built. And thank you for highlighting that and sharing all the valuable insights with us. And thank
Thank
you
you.
for being
Thanks
here.
for having me. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate you.